My article, The Grunge Psyop, got an unusual amount of responses from people. And I wanted to respond to some of the responses because some people make interesting points. And I want to just share my thoughts about regarding what some people say. Um, so I'm not going to read everybody's reply, and if I left yours out, it's nothing personal. I'm more focusing on the people who were taking me to task for something or other, because I don't know, that's what makes the most interesting thing to respond to. All right, so Java Toast writes. uh, There were a good number of us that had grown tired of the 80s hair bands. Additionally, those hair bands were almost all boomers. The grunge era was the first wave of truly Gen X music. The bands were mostly up of Gen X, and a big part of the appeal was simply that it was different. That might be true. I don't know if I'm thinking back. I, I'm thinking probably some of the metal bands were also Gen X, but a lot of them were probably boomers, whereas almost the entirety of the grunge guys were Gen X. So yeah, it is. There is a generational change. However, those Gen X guys were grew up. Not me, and I should say I'm not even a metal fan, nor a grunge fan for that matter. But I knew plenty of guys who I went to high school with, who loved the whole metal aesthetic and embraced it, and it was a part of who they were. And to have that whole look, that whole style, that whole vibe, just change, just suddenly get muted overnight. That's the most suspicious thing about it to me. That's what I really have a hard time understanding. If it had happened organically, as you say, um, a different type of music replacing the the metal scene, or that maybe the hair metal scene or whatever, you would think that would have happened more gradually. But grunge was just like the Seattle sound was an underground thing, and then in 1991 it suddenly wasn't. You write, Java Toast, you write that musical movement caught the music industry completely off guard, and they spent the next 5 years getting music back under their control. Well, remember that it was Geffen who signed Nirvana to Nevermind, their big breakthrough album, and the breakthrough album that exposed the whole grunge scene to the world. So the music industry was in on it pretty early, and that I think supports the notion that that at least some element of it was a psyop. In saying that it was a psyop, I'm not saying that there was nothing real about it, or that it was completely astroturfed, or that the bands who were playing in Seattle, or wherever else doing during the grunge stuff, that they were just agents, or insiders, to all taking part in some coordinated effort. I'm not saying that. My assessment of why it's a psyop is the fact that, or what I'm alleging is that metal was muted all of a sudden, out of the blue, and grunge was elevated all of a sudden out of the blue. And I have other reasons why I see the culture going in that direction, and it all stems to me from the end of the Cold War. And you would have to read more of my stuff on my Substack channel, or my Substack page rather, to understand that, at least to get a grip of what my argument is, and then you can decide whether you agree with it or not. Grace B wrote, "These bands didn't just appear in 1981; they had been playing together for years in different iterations through the latter half of the 80s." And then Grace goes on to give some more detail about these bands. Then she says, "Yeah, studios realized kind of all at once that this was a cash cow. It still is. I see people in faded Nirvana t-shirts they just bought at Target, but it was not a psyop. Sorry." Um, that sort of sassy, sorry about you kind of thing. Um, I mean, this prompted me to answer, do you even know what a psyop is? I think I was maybe a little more pointed than I could have been. I say, do you think in this case that's predicated upon none of these bands existing before 1991? You really believe I was claiming any such thing? And I should have, I maybe could have made that clearer in the article. But you don't just, it's not just to be, what I argued isn't just to be discounted just because these bands didn't just materialize in 1991, as you seem to be arguing here, is the reason why I'm wrong. So, Sean Valdreau writes, "There was no psyop in grunge. Not everything you don't like is a psyop." That would be a good response to an article which makes the argument that everything I don't like is a psyop. First of all, I don't like. I'm not as I've said before, I'm not a metal fan. I'm not a grunge fan. I'm just describing what happened here. My musical taste is actually quite different. I never really cared for loud guitar-based music. So you presume something that is actually not the case. Raul de la Garza III writes, "Well, I agree that it was an unwanted light switch that just turned on at the time. I have to admit that the grunge reflected the angst and depression of the latchkey generation, Gen X, now grown up enough to make their own music, who suffered horribly from the sharp rise in divorce rates and from the mentality of the boomers, that kids were largely an unwanted lot and who were often portrayed in popular media as devils, murderers, and foul-mouthed rebels." That's true. That accounts for its appeal. I'm saying, I'm not saying that that its appeal, that the appeal of grunge was completely manufactured. I'm not saying that people didn't listen to it and hear themselves in it, or hear their own lives, talked about in a way. I think Kurt Cobain talked about several times about how his parents divorced. When his parents divorced, it totally, wrecked his childhood, and everybody he knew had parents who were getting divorced, and it was the divorce. That was when divorce was chic. That was like part of the whole sexual revolution, which also I believe, and I think there's plenty of evidence, was partly a manufactured thing brought about through the 60s counterculture and the manufacturing of the pill, and that's a whole other story. But yes, there is an aspect to. I think it's important to note there's an aspect to grunge that reflects what Gen X was feeling or going through at the time, and that's part of the appeal. See, how a song or a band or a book or a movie or any piece of media, how anything breaks through into the mainstream, it's got to be a combination of things. There's got to be, I think, some artificial means or astroturf means by which this is done. You know, there are bands out there that are probably just as talented as Nirvana, uh, or other bands that made it big, just as talented or more talented. I know for a fact. I know people. I have a friend who ought to be famous, and he isn't. And it's a towering injustice to me that he isn't. Well, where a lot of other people are. And why is that? Why is it fallen out this way? Well, some people, catch a wave and they ride it, and for some people that wave never comes. Um, and part of that wave involves you being promoted or distributed, or nobody's going to know who you are if in the 80s or 90s. Nobody's going to know who you are if they're not playing you on the radio, um, or on MTV. And in order for that to happen, you have to get pushed in that direction, and the same goes for every other type of media as well. So, but then for it to have staying power, there has to be something to it that is powerful enough that the audience responds to it. And so Nevermind, I think, is a great album, even though it's, as I said, grunge isn't grunge, neither grunge nor metal is my type of music. But Nevermind got this immense push by big music, by Geffen. You don't get much bigger than Geffen, right? And then it's on the radio. It Smells Like Teen Spirit is on the radio everywhere, and then kids are buying it up and jamming to it. And then Kurt Cobain is this really iconic character, just this very charismatic guy, and it all takes off from there. But it could have, Kurt Cobain could have been just some nobody for all of his life. And he might have had a better life if he'd just been some nobody, if he'd never been discovered. He might have lived longer. And he might have, I don't know, found a better way to live. But anyway, that's just, it's a complicated thing. So just because people gravitate to something, people gravitating to something does not preclude that it that it could have also been artificially brought about. All right. Okay, Woolly Wool says, as a metalhead, I'm going to call bullshit on this one. Skipping down a little bit. Hair metal deserved what it got. The only really bad thing was that American traditional and power metal got caught in the blast radius of its demolition. There was no psyop. Record companies have tried to kill scenes when they make records harder to market and sell or otherwise threaten profits, like when 70s prog rock, jazz fusion, funk, etc. threatened to congeal into a giant web of interconnected artists and scenes, blah, blah, blah. They were not interested in social engineering. Social engineering does not increase shareholder returns. I'm not doubting that they wanted to make a profit, but I think I guess if you're of the mindset that profit motive is the only thing that motivates the powerful, then there's really that's like that's a loop you've erected. That's like a mental. That's kind of like Freud saying the only thing that motivates people is sex. I would say it's reductive. And yeah, the powerful want to make money, but they also want to. There are also idealists among them, and there are those among them who wouldn't be called idealists, but who are ideologues and who want to change hearts and minds and see the propagandistic value of change of media, especially popular music, popular culture, as a way of changing minds. Um, so you say they were not interested in social engineering. Well, maybe record executives weren't, but are they the only ones who are playing in this game? Aren't there others uh, who could? Aren't there other influencers? Um, it took decades for it to come out that modern art was being promoted by the CIA. Now it's a known fact that the CIA was funding modern art. Um, they had strategic reasons to do that, and probably ideological reasons to do it as well. But you know, it wasn't like I'm sure that that those who are in the art industry also wanted to make money and also wanted to find the kind of art that people would buy so that they would make money. But there was another player involved uh, in that case, and I'm arguing that uh, my what I believe to be the case is that we have something similar happening here. James Allen writes, "I think it's a good article you wrote, but Jesus Christ, is everything a psyop?" Again, I'm not saying everything, although it might seem that way. It might seem that it's definitely there. It's become uh, in recent times there has been a fashion among a certain crowd to see things as psyops. um, and I would say no, not every. There are things that happen organically, but there are also things that are twisted or where the culture is channeled in a particular direction, and they do their best to prevent it going into a different direction. Um, they amplify one genre and mute another genre. That's what I think happened here between 1990 and 1991. Daniel D writes, "Interesting they amped up grunge at the same time they were amping up gangster rap. Get the white kids depressed and suicidal and the black kids criminally violent and perpetually aggrieved. What a combination." Way back when, I think maybe maybe it was as far back as the 90s. I I wrote an article and tried to get it published somewhere, but this was before the internet, so you couldn't just post it uh, on your Substack, or you couldn't just blog it. But the title was "Black Swagger, White Angst," and made exactly that observation that you made. I think that gangster rap is probably also a psyop, considering it really was not promoting what was healthy for the black community, and you know I've heard the claim made that more positive uh, black music was being muted, and this destructive stuff about bitches and hoes and being a gangsta and killing everybody, um, that was amplified. It was around the same time that there was an undeniable uh, CIA operation which involved buying cocaine from Central America and then selling it in the inner city. Um, the whole crack epidemic was a result of that. How was cocaine getting into the inner city? By what means was it getting there? Anyhow, that's a whole other thing. Um, and it also seems just to add on to that, an addendum. It seems to me like recently I've heard rap songs where rap is suddenly full of angst. Like Juice World, like had he comes to he was a young guy who died tragically at a really young age, and he was all like singing about how suicidal he was and about you know love isn't real and all this kind of emo stuff. Seems like rap is kind of going, or part of rap is, I don't know the scene well enough, but it seems like that's, they're almost uh, making rap go that, or part of the rap scene go that way now. Maybe it's just organic, maybe not. It's something that I took notice of recently. All right, Annie 3000 seems to or makes the same kind of argument that uh, that the the grunge scene was building up. It didn't just suddenly appear in 1991, and that's again not my point, as I said before. Uh, but you know, what I say in the article is admittedly speculative. Brian Goad, Brian Goad, any relation? I wonder. Brian Goad, Goad, writes, "I hope this is satire. Maybe the dumbest take I've seen on the topic. Nope, I'm just that dumb. Sorry, Brian." Laya Marie, what is the native population? People who were born in America are the native population. As I say to every conspiracy theorist, the devil is in the details. If you can't identify the tastemakers and explain in detail how they transform the culture overnight, it just remains a conspiracy theory. I disagree. I don't think you have to have all of the receipts to postulate something, considering the trends that you see. Uh, I think it's legitimate to look at uh, things changing very very suddenly, and an entire genre just disappearing, just going down the memory hole, and kids who were dressing a certain way, singing a certain type of song, getting into a certain type of scene, suddenly finding just having the rug yanked out from under them, and all having to just become either adapt or fade away. Become this. T- Take off your tight jeans and put on your flannel and get depressed, or get left behind. I think that's just because I don't think you have to say I've got here's an example of like somebody else said, until you can provide the receipts showing the checks from the CIA to the Sub Pop Corporation in Seattle, uh, you don't really have a leg to stand on. I mean, again, I point out the CIA funding modern art, which happened in the 40s and 50s and was not known until much, much later. But now it's an established fact. You know, if somebody had said, I think it's strange that all of this modern art is propping up, and like who asked for this, you know. If I think there might be some force behind this. This might be getting some artificial boosting. If you'd said that in the 50s, your counterpart in the 50s would just come along and say, "Oh yeah, well, where's the receipts, conspiracy theorist?" But I think there's value in saying this makes sense to me. Here's an idea, and even if it can't be proved, uh, it fits. It jibes with reality. It jibes with trends of reality, of culture and society. So, but naysayers gonna naysay. Kevin Onan says, "I bet you still have poison posters on the ceiling over your bed." You could not be more wrong, Kevin Onan. I was not a metal fan. I am not a metal fan. I have no stake in this at all. In fact, the younger me, despised heavy metal and hair metal and all, like loud guitar music. It just wasn't the scene that I was into. I sort of looked down on it as a young man. So I was happy when it got replaced. But now, looking back on it, I definitely see a pattern. James Homan writes, "That's a take, but where does it come from?" That's a take. Not that's an interesting take. That's a take. But where does it come from? I was hoping for some kind of smoking gun. Grunge wasn't really unprecedented in its themes. The Velvet Underground was glorifying heroin chic in 1967 in the middle of the Cold War. Yeah, there were plenty of precedents for grunge. I mean, Velvet Underground was one. Punk rock, new wave, all like there were lots of things that were to some extent there, but they weren't pushed into the mainstream the way that grunge was. That's the difference. Velvet Underground in 1967 was an underground. It was underground music. And underground music, it existed and it had its own demographic that it appealed to, but it wasn't ruling the airwaves. It wasn't topping the charts the way that grunge suddenly was in 1991. That's my point. Well, that's it. Thanks to everyone who has responded to my article. I appreciate it.